At 4:15 a.m. on June 22, 1941, artillery from German Army Group Center opened fire across the Bug River near the town of Brest-Litovsk. The first shells were fired by elements of the 47th Panzer Corps under General Joachim Lemelsen. Within minutes, batteries from the 4th Army, commanded by Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, joined the barrage. 1,500 guns struck Soviet border positions in a coordinated fire plan timed to the minute. Across the river stood units of the Soviet 4th Army. Many soldiers were still in barracks. Communications lines were cut within the first 10 minutes. The operational objective was precise. Army Group Center, under Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, was tasked with driving through Belarus, encircling Soviet forces near Minsk, and advancing toward Smolensk. From there, the road to Moscow would lie open. The German plan relied on speed. Panzer Group II under General Heinz Guderian and Panzer Group III under General Hermann Hoth would punch through weak points, then swing inward to form vast encirclements. Infantry divisions would follow, reduce pockets, and secure supply corridors. By 5:30 a.m., assault engineers from the 45th Infantry Division were crossing the Bug River in rubber boats under covering fire. Behind them rolled Panzerkampfwagen 3 tanks armed with 50mm guns and Panzerkampfwagen 4 tanks mounting short-barreled 75mm cannons designed for infantry support. Fuel trucks followed close behind. The German doctrine of Blitzkrieg depended on tight coordination between armor, motorized infantry, artillery, and close air support. Luftwaffe aircraft from Luftflotte 2 struck Soviet airfields at dawn. Within the first day, hundreds of Soviet aircraft were destroyed, many on the ground. Speed was everything. By June 24th, at 2 p.m., spearheads of the 3rd Panzer Division had advanced more than 100 miles. Radio traffic indicated Soviet formations were collapsing in confusion. Entire rifle divisions were being bypassed and surrounded. The Minsk encirclement began to take shape. Here is why this mattered strategically. If Army Group Center could destroy Soviet forces west of the Dnieper River within the first month, the Red Army would lose its forward defensive belt. Moscow would be exposed before winter. German planners believed the Soviet Union would collapse politically if its capital fell. The map of Eastern Europe hung on the success of these opening weeks. On June 28th, at 9 a.m., forward elements of Panzer Group III linked with Panzer Group II east of Minsk. The encirclement trapped elements of the Soviet 3rd, 10th, and 13th Armies. More than 300,000 Soviet soldiers were eventually captured. It appeared decisive. Yet even in victory, warning signs emerged. German supply columns were already overstretched. The standard German infantry division depended on horse-drawn transport for much of its logistics. Roads in Belarus were narrow and poorly surfaced. Dust-clogged engines. Fuel consumption exceeded estimates. Panzer units were advancing faster than rail conversion teams could adapt Soviet broad-gauge tracks to German standard gauge. Every mile east increased the distance between the front line and depots in Poland. At Smolensk in mid-July, resistance stiffened. Soviet forces under General Georgy Zhukov began counterattacks. German panzer divisions reported mounting mechanical breakdowns. Tracks wore down, engines overheated. Still, momentum carried them forward. By August 10th at 11 a.m., forward reconnaissance units of the 10th Panzer Division reported being within 200 miles of Moscow. The belief inside German headquarters remained firm. One final blow would shatter Soviet resistance before autumn rains. But strategic disagreement began to fracture the high command. Adolf Hitler ordered Panzer Group II to pivot south toward Kiev in late August. The objective was to eliminate Soviet forces in Ukraine and secure economic resources. Guderian protested. He argued that Moscow was the operational center of gravity. The diversion delayed the central advance by critical weeks. When the drive on Moscow resumed in early October under Operation Typhoon, autumn rains turned roads into mud. Vehicles sank to their axles. Fuel trucks lagged miles behind. Yet at 1 p.m. on October 2nd, 1941, German artillery once again opened fire along a broad front. The final offensive toward Moscow had begun. The strategic calculation was ruthless. Capture the capital before winter. Destroy remaining Soviet reserves west of the city. Force political collapse. But German intelligence underestimated one factor: time. Winter was approaching, and the Wehrmacht had not prepared for a prolonged campaign in sub-zero conditions. Winter uniforms were not yet distributed. Lubricants were rated for moderate climates. Engine antifreeze supplies were insufficient. The entire campaign assumed the Soviet Union would fall before snow. By mid-October, temperatures began to drop sharply at night. German mechanics reported oil thickening in engines before dawn. Weapons required extra force to cycle. Horses weakened as fodder ran short. Still, the advance continued. On November 15th at 6:30 a.m., renewed attacks pushed toward Klin and Tula. German forward units could see church spires on the distant approaches to Moscow. They were close enough to believe victory was within reach. But at 4 a.m. on November 27th, temperature readings near the front fell below 0 degrees Fahrenheit for the first time. Engines failed to start. Bolts froze. Men wrapped rags around boots that were never designed for Arctic cold. The Wehrmacht had conquered France in 6 weeks. Now it faced a different enemy, not just the Red Army, but winter itself. At 6:30 a.m. on December 5, 1941, along a snow-covered front stretching from Kalinin in the north to Yelets in the south, Soviet artillery opened fire. The temperature near Klin measured approximately negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. German thermometers and forward command posts cracked during the night. Opposite the Soviet line stood exhausted formations of Army Group Center. The 3rd Panzer Army under General Georg Hans Reinhardt held positions north of Moscow. The 4th Panzer Army under General Erich Höppner faced the approaches to the capital. Infantry divisions, such as the 256th Infantry Division and the 31st Infantry Division, occupied thin defensive sectors with reduced strength. Many rifle companies that had begun the campaign with 180 men now counted fewer than 60 effectives. Lubricating oil in Panzerkampfwagen. 3 tanks had thickened into sludge. Standard Wehrmacht engine oil was rated for moderate European climates. In temperatures below negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, starter motors failed. Crews lit small fires beneath engine blocks in desperate attempts to warm frozen components before dawn attacks. Artillery recoil systems malfunctioned. Breach mechanisms required repeated hammer strikes to cycle. Machine guns, such as the MG-34, suffered stoppages unless cleaned constantly and re-oiled with improvised mixtures. German winter clothing shipments were delayed by rail bottlenecks west of Smolensk. Rail conversion units had not completed sufficient track adjustments from Soviet broad gauge to German standard gauge. Supply trains halted miles behind the front. Horses died in large numbers due to frozen fodder and exhaustion. The operational objective of Operation Typhoon had been the capture of Moscow before winter. By early December, that objective had failed. The German High Command faced a new reality: hold ground through winter with forces designed for mobile offensive warfare. The Soviet counteroffensive was directed by General Georgy Zhukov. Fresh divisions from Siberia, transferred after intelligence confirmed that Japan would not attack from the east, entered combat. These units were equipped with winter camouflage uniforms, felt boots, and lubricants suited for extreme cold. At 7:15 a.m. on December 5, Soviet rifle divisions, supported by T-34 tanks, attacked the sector of the German 256th Infantry Division near Klin. The T-34, armed with a 76mm gun and wide tracks, moved more effectively across snow than German Panzers. Its diesel engine was less prone to ignition failure in low temperatures. German anti-tank guns of 37mm caliber struggled against the sloped armor at range. Within hours, forward German positions were overrun. The strategic consequence was immediate. If Soviet forces could rupture Army Group center lines north and south of Moscow, they could encircle advanced German units and reverse the entire campaign. German commanders requested permission to withdraw to shorter defensive lines. Field Marshal Fedor von Bock recommended tactical retreats to preserve combat strength. Adolf Hitler refused. On December 8, at 2 p.m., Hitler issued a directive ordering all units to stand fast. No voluntary withdrawal was permitted without explicit approval. The intent was to prevent panic and maintain cohesion. The risk was encirclement. In the sector of the 4th Panzer Army near Tula, the 10th Motorized Infantry Division reported that only 40% of vehicles were operational due to mechanical failure. Fuel deliveries arrived irregularly. Ammunition stocks dropped below recommended minimum levels. Frostbite casualties began to exceed combat wounds. Medical reports from divisional surgeons indicated thousands of cases of severe cold injury by mid-December. The German command structure also suffered disruption. Communications lines froze. Field telephones malfunctioned. Radio batteries drained rapidly in sub-zero temperatures. Orders were delayed. Units sometimes acted on outdated intelligence. You can imagine the tension inside forward command bunkers. Maps displayed arrows pointing toward Moscow. In reality, those arrows no longer moved forward. They bent backward. By December 15 at 9 a.m., Soviet forces had pushed German units back more than 60 miles in some sectors. The city of Kalinin was recaptured. The threat to Moscow diminished significantly. This mattered beyond the battlefield. The failure to capture Moscow before winter shattered the German assumption of a short war in the east. The Red Army demonstrated resilience and operational depth. Politically, it strengthened Soviet morale and signaled to Britain and the United States that the Soviet Union would continue fighting. The map of Europe began to change, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through survival. Army Group Center did not collapse entirely. Some German formations held defensive lines through disciplined resistance. In certain sectors, stand-fast orders prevented chaotic rout. However, the cost was severe attrition in men and equipment. By late December, German armored divisions reported fewer than 50 operational tanks, in some units that had started the campaign with more than 200. The winter had exposed structural weaknesses in Blitzkrieg doctrine when applied to vast distances and prolonged supply chains, but the crisis was not yet over. In January 1942, Soviet offensives expanded along multiple fronts. German forces faced the possibility of a broader encirclement west of Moscow. If Army Group Center disintegrated, the entire Eastern Front could unravel, and the Wehrmacht would face a war not of months, but of years. At 7 a.m. on January 8, 1942, Soviet forces launched a renewed offensive against the German Ninth Army near Rzhev, west of Moscow. Snow lay more than 2 feet deep across the forests and open fields. The temperature hovered near negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. German sentries stamped their boots to maintain circulation as Soviet artillery struck forward trenches. The Ninth Army, commanded by General Walter Model, held a protruding line known as the Rzhev salient. This bulge in the front extended westward and created both opportunity and danger. From it, German forces could threaten Moscow again in the spring, but the salient also exposed flanks to Soviet attack from north and south. The operational objective for the Soviet Western Front was clear: break through at Rzhev and Vyazma, encircle large elements of Army Group Center, force a general German retreat toward Smolensk. If successful, the map of Eastern Europe would shift dramatically. German positions won in the summer of 1941 would collapse. The myth of invincibility would erode further. Inside German headquarters, reality was stark. Panzer divisions were shadows of their former strength. The 6th Panzer Division reported fewer than 30 operational tanks. Many were immobilized not by enemy fire, but by frozen transmissions and cracked engine blocks. German infantry relied heavily on the Karabiner 98K rifle. In extreme cold, metal parts burned bare skin. Soldiers wrapped cloth around bolts and triggers. Machine gun crews rotated duties frequently to prevent frostbite. Supply remained critical. Rail lines from Poland to Smolensk functioned at reduced capacity. Locomotives struggled in freezing temperatures. Coal consumption increased. Ammunition deliveries were prioritized over winter clothing. General Model adopted elastic defense tactics. Rather than rigidly holding every trench, he organized strong points around villages and forest edges. Artillery was concentrated to deliver short, controlled counter-barrages. Reserves were positioned to seal breakthroughs quickly. At 10:30 a.m. on January 8, Soviet rifle regiments supported by ski battalions infiltrated wooded areas north of Rzhev. Communication lines between German battalions were cut temporarily. Reports reached Corps headquarters with delay due to frozen radio batteries. Here the earlier stand fast directive met battlefield reality. In some sectors, German regiments conducted limited tactical withdrawals without formal approval. In others, units held positions until nearly surrounded, then fought their way out at night. The winter was not a single battle. It was a grinding test of endurance, logistics, and command judgment. Strategically, Germany faced a transformed war. The initial objective of destroying the Red Army in border battles had failed. Soviet industrial capacity east of the Ural Mountains continued production. Replacement divisions arrived steadily. The Wehrmacht, by contrast, had not mobilized fully for total war in 1941. Equipment losses from June to December exceeded planning assumptions. Vehicle wear from more than 600 miles of advance strained maintenance units beyond capacity. By February 1st at 2 p.m., Soviet offensives around Vyazma created temporary pockets behind German lines. Several German divisions faced encirclement threats. Luftwaffe transport aircraft attempted aerial resupply, but severe weather limited flights. The German High Command recognized a turning point. The campaign was no longer about rapid encirclements. It was about survival and adaptation. Winter conditions forced technical adjustments. New lubricants rated for extreme cold were introduced gradually. Winter clothing production increased. Tank crews modified engine starting procedures, running engines periodically through the night when fuel allowed. These adaptations stabilized the front by late February 1942. The Rzhev salient remained in German hands, though at heavy cost. Why did this winter matter so deeply? First, it ended the concept of a quick, decisive campaign in the east. The failure before Moscow ensured a prolonged conflict that would drain German manpower and industry. Second, it demonstrated Soviet operational resilience. Despite catastrophic losses in 1941, the Red Army retained the capacity to launch coordinated winter offensives. Third, it altered global strategy. The United States had entered the war in December 41. Germany now faced a multi-theater conflict. Resources committed to the east could not be easily replaced. The winter did not destroy Army Group Center, but it froze the momentum that had carried German forces across thousands of miles in 6 months. You can trace later battles back to this moment: Stalingrad in 1942, Kursk in 1943. Each was shaped by the failure to conclude the war in 1941. By March 1942, temperatures began to rise slowly. Snow melted into mud. The front stabilized roughly west of Moscow. German soldiers who had crossed the Bug River at 4:15 a.m. on June 22nd now understood a harsh truth. They were fighting a continental war of attrition. The winter had not merely slowed an army. It had exposed the limits of Blitzkrieg against geography, climate, and industrial depth. And from that frozen ground west of Moscow, the long road to Berlin truly began.